From beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, you are listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show, and I do thank you for being with me today and spending your time with me. I have a special guest, and that is my fantastic producer, Daniel Blanchett. He's going to sit in with me today, and we're going to talk about a few things.
I'm on the short bus of Liberty here with Sherry.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, I don't ride the short bus. I ride the long bus, the extra long bus that needs the articulated bus.
Yeah, no, we're not on there.
So anyways, Daniel is the producer of my show, and he does a great job, and I appreciate everything that he does for me and the show. So we are going to sit together today and just have a conversation about women. He's single, ladies. You heard it here. Call him.
Beyonce.
She's taken.
That's not what the song says.
Oh, okay. All right. They can have whatever relationship they wish to have. I am not judgmental about relationships. So, anywho, recently I was in a private group that's on Facebook, and I saw this poll, and I had been kind of talking with people in there over the past few days about this subject, and it is about women voting. And the question was posed is, do you think it's coincidental that American government has become bigger and bigger since women began voting in 1920? And it also, he premised it by saying that he read somewhere that women are attracted to authority, and that he feels like this may be why women, or why the government has gotten bigger and bigger, not the country. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that a little bit, and then maybe go into what are you?
So I think he might be overstating the correlation a little bit, but let's find out what he had to say, and we'll explore it some.
Well, yeah. So they're assuming that women are attracted to authority, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think there are biological, evolutionary differences between men and women and what they desire in general. Now, we're not speaking for every woman or any of that crap. You guys are smart enough to figure out what we're saying, so I'm not going to go into that. But that there,
Sherry's a collectivist.
yeah, that there are things that are different about men and women, and one of the things that women tend to value is security,
right,
and maybe authority as well, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but
and certainly Western culture has taught women to value authority.
There may be some of that, like there may be things that are cultural that have played into that natural predisposition of women. Just like for men, there are things like, men don't cry, that kind of thing, where in a lot of cultures, men they cry openly and they have no problem with it, whereas American men tend to have a problem with that and see it as unmanly. So yes,
yeah,
but
not me. I cry all the time.
Yeah, you shed tears every night.
No,
on your pillow?
just like every dumb movie, and
that is true.
Bad.
You are kind of a crybaby, but so am I. Like, what is that about us that we're crybabies? But you cry at different things. When we've watched movies together, I've noticed that you cry at different things that I cry at. Like sometimes, like some of the things are the same.
Yeah.
But watching it, at the end, you were crying about them holding the hands and.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, you had a little tear, got a little teary-eyed. Anyways, so for one, I just wanted to say I think women generally are more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's part of what makes us great in a lot of ways.
That's what makes me weird.
Yeah, that's not what makes you weird, Daniel.
That's it. That's the only thing.
No, I have a list. It's in Word. I'll share it with you. It's in documents. I'll just share that with you later. But I think that women are generally more emotional. And so I think what I do for my daughter is...
punch her?
No, Daniel, I don't punch her. So I know that she has emotion. She's very much like me, okay? And I'm kind of a roller coaster, as you may know, of emotions. But they go fast. Like, I get upset, but it's usually gone pretty quick. Like it burns out fast. Like it's bright, but it burns fast. And I don't hold grudges generally.
But there are aftershocks.
Are there?
Yes. No, like it's a ripple.
Okay.
It burns out fast and then comes back and then goes away again. And
Oh, no, you got me all wrong. But anyways, so she's a lot like I am, and she's very, very passionate young woman of 7. And she feels that she is a grown-assed woman, like, But, so...
She is going to rule the world or burn it to the ground.
Yeah, probably both. She's going to do both, rule it and burn it. But I'm going to try and, bring back that tendency to rule and have her... kill them with kindness, right? Or, unless it's, never mind, I'm not going to say that. I don't want the drones to come. They're already probably firing up. But, so I when she has an episode where she's really upset about something and we need to make a decision.
Can I call it an episode with you?
No.
Oh, damn.
You will anyways, though. So... When she has a little episode,
I think there's going to be a job opening soon. Go ahead.
Can I finish one complete thought here? Let me do it.
Okay, squirrel.
No, you're squirreling me.
Okay.
Like I'm distracted easily.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and you're doing it on purpose. So, anyways, what I do with her is I acknowledge that she's having an emotion that she may be having a hard time containing because she is 7. And she's like me. And then, acknowledging that, but then asking her to walk it back a little. Let's think about it. So I think that would go a long way in helping anyone who is emotional and irrational at times to learn how to make decisions, to bring your emotions subject to your logic.
Okay, so I'm just taking notes.
Yeah. So, I think emotions are a wonderful thing, and that's something that women can bring to the table is, that sort of aspect of life that maybe men don't show as much. But I think that would help. I also think that it's not a problem with women. It's not a problem that women got the vote, because there's a problem with men having the vote too, that nobody should be voting as a mob because you have more numbers than I do, that you should be able to force me to do things.
So, do you think we should go back to the original concept where landowners are the ones that get the vote?
I have seen that was posed in this conversation, and one of the things I thought was, okay, so now we're not just talking about women not being able to vote. We're talking about women not being able to own land, because I know plenty of women who own land.
No, I'm not. Rather than exclude it to men or women.
Oh, just
if we're going back to
landowners,
the idea
period.
of the founding fathers, that was kind of key back then.
Yeah, then you kind of disenfranchise the poor as well, so they become an underclass that doesn't have which they kind of already are in this country. I mean, let's be honest, but
and realistically, that was kind of how the country got started.
Yeah, in the 1700s,
right.
It's a little bit different now, and I think more evolved in some ways, very much more evolved, and then in other ways maybe not so much. But I think they're missing the fact that the centralization of power is one of the things that is a problem. Like, this is one of the problems you have whenever you have a centralized authority, a centralized power, is that they have favors to sell, and they're going to sell them, and they have that force that they can exert over everyone. And so you have different factions that pop up to get that proxy force in their power so that they can use it, because it's legitimized that way.
Right.
The force is legitimized. So I think that is one of the things that is overlooked in this conversation, and that also that it seems to me that the whole system is the problem, and not women or men or whatever. It's the system that we have, or we have this indoctrination through schools and through even our sports, that have the big military. They're paid by stolen tax money to indoctrinate people, to get them to join the military, things like that. So we have all of these different aspects coming in to legitimize their authority over us in their minds, and for a lot of people that works. But do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think you've got a good point. I would also say that So the argument he was making is that it goes back to women getting the vote, and I think it more goes back to the Depression and the idea that government is here to save the day, and that by having daddy government hand out all this money and all these do nothing jobs and all the different things that happened as a way to prolong the Depression. I mean, to end the Depression, that people learned to trust the government would take care of them, even though they weren't capable of taking care of themselves.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And that we've really, really come a long way in that line of thinking, that it's become more and more so that people don't expect others to pull themselves up or work towards their own salvation, if you will. That if you hand them something, that's the more compassionate thing to do. And it helps them when really it doesn't. Generally, it keeps people where they're at. It doesn't help them. Like, you don't teach kids how to be responsible by giving them no responsibility, right? You have to give them responsibility in order to teach them to be responsible. And I think it's the same thing. I mean, we all have aspects of life where we have to grow and learn. And there are reasons that people get behind the eight ball that are just not necessarily their fault, that things just happen in life sometime, and that's what it is. But
my experience, though, I mean, even with that is that when bad things happen, that's when you get the most chance to make a giant leap forward.
Exactly.
Because you get knocked out of what you were doing and out of your complacency, and then you have to scramble and you have to think and you have to be creative and figure out a new way.
Right.
And by having a safety net that's too all-encompassing, that kicks in too fast, people lose that sense of desperation that could send them forward, and instead they just slide into despair.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you're exactly right, because as we know, life is about incentives and what's incentivized. And I'm not against helping people, but I'm against stealing from people and calling it help.
Right.
Stealing from one group to give to another and calling that help. That is not help. And it's been proven over and over. But that incentive, like, there are bad things in life that hurt, and there are incentives for you to do different things. Like, that's the way life works. So we want that incentive of, well, this is my money, and if I spend it all on crack or on gambling or on whatever, that I'm not going to be able to provide for my family. And that's an incentive not to do those things.
Right.
But if you know that your family's still going to be taken care of, maybe not in the best of ways, but they're still going to have food on the table and a roof over their head,
and probably
you're not
a
as
40-inch flat panel TV.
Yeah, you're not as likely to care as much about those things. And I don't know, I'm not trying to blame addicts or whatever. I know there's issues, but the point is that life is about incentives, and we need those incentives. The state steps in between many incentives for people to do different things in their life, and instead it kind of softens the blow sometimes when people do need those things. Like, I know that there are times in my life where I have had something bad happen and it's motivated me to do something else, or maybe even put myself in a situation, because a lot of times, it's things that we've created for ourselves. But that those bad times kind of help me, okay, I need to be a better person, or I need to do this differently, or I need to think about this differently, and that helps. That's how you grow. But if you soften those things, and we get a society where a large part of people are not mature, which I think we have now, where a lot of people aren't adults when they're adults. They're of majority, but they're not actually prepared to handle their life.
Right.
So, but back to the women thing. I think that, women may be more susceptible to a certain kind of authority, but men are also susceptible to authority. Because if you look at, who's fighting the wars, it's generally mostly men.
Oh, yeah. No,
who are police.
We take the people who might be the most independent-minded, and we convince them to join the military and learn to respect authority.
Yeah.
So that they can be good followers. They may be allowed to lead a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're, you have your space, and don't ever try to get outside of it, because you've got to respect the chain of command.
Right. And you see that a lot in the police as well, where they get upset and they harm someone. They either beat them or shoot them or something because they disrespected their authority, not because they actually did something wrong. So we've seen that in many cases. And so, that's the problem with authoritarianism, is that it's not about thinking. It's not about, well, this isn't really that big a deal, I'm not going to worry about it. It's the fact that you disrespected the authority. And, that it's damaging. And I grew up in a religious group that taught, authoritarianism as a form of parenting. And, I sort of raised my son that way in his younger years in his life. And I really regret that now. And I see it for what it is. And that there was often, we were taught, it doesn't matter what the fight is. It doesn't matter. A parent doesn't walk away. You must win every conflict you have with your child.
Right.
Because you're the authority, and they have to respect the authority of the parent. And I do believe in natural authority as a parent. I believe that I hold my children's rights in a trust, and as they get older and older, like my son is basically, he's a young man, and he basically can do what he wants to do.
He's more mature than you are.
Yeah, that's probably true. He's more mature than most people. But, so I don't really hold his rights and trust anymore.
Right.
Because he's able to care for himself. He's able to do things. He makes great decisions in general, but he still lives with us, and we're there for guidance and to help him. And then as my daughter gets older, she gets more and more of those rights. There are things that I do right now. I don't make those decisions for her because I'm only holding those things in a trust until she's mature enough to handle her life. So that's a totally different approach. And there are plenty of things that I walk away from now. Mm-hmm. Even though it's hard for me because I'm generally a fighter. It's because
you're finally learning to follow my example of just having free-range feral children.
Your children are great. They
right.
really are, but they're not feral.
Oh, they absolutely are feral.
No. But I'm not saying that there are no legitimate authorities. I'm saying authoritarianism is a different thing. That there's a difference between an authority and authoritarianism. And in my children's life, I am an authority, but I try not to be authoritarian in how I carry out those things. And so I think in that broad spectrum of life, we see authoritarianism as something that is held up, especially in Western culture, as, and maybe particularly in American culture, as something to be admired. And when you respect and just obey the authority, then you're doing the right thing. Like the woman who called the police on the little girl selling water bottles.
She was totally doing the right thing. That was against the law.
Oh my goodness.
You shouldn't be allowed to sell water on the street just willy-nilly. How will the state will collapse without the 3 cents they get,
Right, which they'd already gotten.
Water.
It had been bought from somewhere.
Well, but it was sold in case lots only. It wasn't priced for individual sale.
Right, just individual taxes on each bottle.
And thank goodness you can do that, because I survived my 20s by selling bottled water at concerts. So
at dead shows. Let's tell the people you were a deadhead.
Nope, I was out rollerblading around selling ice cold soda
in your skirt
and bottled water in my skirt. Yep. Yeah. It was a good time. I enjoyed myself.
It sounds like you were having a good time.
Yeah.
I think there were things that helped you have a good time.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So anyways, so that's authoritarianism, where they don't even have to police the people anymore in those ways, because we police ourselves. We see someone doing something that's not hurting a person in the world. And the thing that this little girl should be admired for, figuring out a way to make some money for herself. Well, I would love to encourage that in kids.
Yeah, and on top of that, her neighbors were able to get bottled water that they wouldn't have had otherwise, because they wouldn't have paid her price had they already had access to it. So she was doing them a favor.
Right. I just that's authoritarianism, though, the fact that you're not doing what the right thing is, and the right thing is laid down by the authority, not morality, not philosophy, not any of the things where right and wrong are really determined, but that the authority has said that this is the way the thing is done, and if you don't do the thing the way the thing is supposed to be done, then you're automatically wrong. And that
unless
is
you're
not.
part of that class,
You mean
the ruling class. Like
Right.
If you are the cop, you're not a. You're
if
not
you're wealthy
obliged to follow the
enough,
rules.
right? And if you're wealthy enough, and if you are an authority in
Yeah.
the system, you're a state agent. And I'm not a class warfare person. Like I say, get as rich as you possibly can, because that's where you get real freedom in a lot of ways.
So I'm not talking about financial class. I'm talking
Right.
about the ruling class versus the ruled.
The ruled, right?
So if you are in a position of authority, either through the position of your job, through your extreme financial wherewithal, or through any of the things that lead to people being respected, that you're above the law.
Right.
So, the prime example would be like O.J. Simpson getting away with murder because he was a famous football player.
Right.
Just because, I kind of believe that part of why the black community cheered about that was that finally a black man got to exhibit privilege
Yes.
in a way that, they historically hadn't been able to. They had to have believed that he had really done it, but they just, they were cheering the tables getting turned.
Yes, that for many, many years, they had lived under basically martial law in some parts of California.
Yeah, especially
there.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, and so, what people don't know is there were so many incidents before where grave injustices had been done in their communities, like the woman who was shot over like a $4 water bill in her front yard by the police, like that kind of thing. When you see that happening to your friends and neighbors, when you don't have freedom of movement, you can't walk down the street without being basically harassed by the police, and what are you doing? Where are you going? Nobody's business. So I think it was a reaction to those years and years of them seeing that in their communities and nothing being done to officers who were engaging in the brutality. And finally, even though he was wrong, like I agree with you, I don't know that a lot of them believe he was actually innocent of it, but for them, they didn't care. It was finally
Right.
somebody that looked like them getting off, and that comes from where they come from, getting off for something. Because they are part of the privileged class.
Right.
I think you're exactly right. And I just wanted to point out that with the military and the police and all the things that, are generally the area of men, that men are enamored with authority too. Like men want to be the boss, and until there's a bigger boss, and then they will submit to that. So there's a enamorment, if that's a word, with authority as well. And the reasons for men and women being attracted to different authority, maybe, there may be different reasons for that, but they all are devastating.
Right.
They all have the same effect. So whether it's women voting for social programs, or men joining the military or the police force and just following orders, it still has the same effect of oppressing people who want to live freely.
Right.
So I think that's the point that has to be made, that it's not just that women are the problem. Now, that may be a particular problem, is how women vote.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think the amount of women that vote on things is big enough for women to be responsible for all the move to the left in the country or the move to the right.
Yeah, I would even argue that, so he does have a point that women tend to vote with
Right.
emotion as being more of a consideration, but it's a cop-out to say that that's why the country has shifted the way it has, because all it takes is conservative people to acknowledge and, to show some compassion and to make an argument that says you're not going to be left behind. You just have to give the right argument that, we're trying, you can't make it like you're not worthy because you're poor, or
Right.
you're not capable of doing better, that you're playing into the same pandering game on the left and the right these
Right.
days. You're letting the left define the message. You're
Yes.
letting the socialists define the terms, when, as far as I'm concerned, keeping government out of your life is actually the more compassionate way, because it lets people help each other. It doesn't leave people to the whims of the state, which honestly, you're more likely to end up like that poor kid in England who was forced to die when he had an option that could have maybe saved his life, because the state knows best and you don't get to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's it may be valid to point out that women tend to generally be attracted to left authoritarianism, but men generally tend to be attracted to right authoritarianism, and that the problem is not that's a perversion that the state has figured out of men and women's natural proclivities. That's where the problem lies. The problem lies with the state, with the system that would twist people's natural instincts in that way. And so I think we have to, like, asking the question, is the problem that women vote or the problem that men do this? I think that's a spook. I think it's a distraction from the actual issue, which is the state monopoly on force, the state monopoly on violence and authority, that they have this monopoly on law as well. And we're taught, you just obey the law. Just do what the cop says and you won't get hurt. Like, why can't people understand this? I've seen that online. Why can't they understand? If they just did what the cop said, they wouldn't get hurt. And all I can hear in my head is that if you just get in the boxcar and go, then things will be better. If you just need to do that. And it's the same line of thinking. We might not be there yet in many ways, but it's the same logic. So I think that we have to aim our criticisms at the system that would pervert people's natural instincts like that, and that would give one mob authority over another mob, because that's really all that we know, that most people don't even vote in this country. So it's not like they have a mandate to do things, but because they've legitimized that system, instead of saying, well, we didn't have a majority of anybody voting for this, maybe we shouldn't do anything. They just cut those people out as if they don't matter. And the only reason they don't matter is because the system has been legitimized.
Right.
So, if that makes sense. I think it makes sense. So anyways.
It makes at least as much sense as anything else you say.
Yes. Thank you. So I guess the bottom line is that it's the state and the system that's been legitimized that takes advantage of the vulnerabilities that men and women both have, and that it's not fair to just pick out women and their voting as a way, even if that's the facts, it's still only one small piece of the puzzle of why government has grown. And it's also ignoring the fact that the centralization of power always grows that way.
Right.
I don't think, like if you think about the ancient Sparta, one of the most authoritarian regimes ever,
right,
that women didn't have a say in how that worked, but it was far right, extreme what we would call extreme authoritarianism. And so that was a bunch of men that were in this war culture. And so I think that you can look at that from so many angles and see that the problem is the power and not the people within it, because the people within it have just learned how to manipulate it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a truism that government exists to grow.
Yes.
That government has grown since 1920 isn't really any different than the fact that government has grown since 1776.
Yes.
We started out with a perfectly valid document that we could have run our country based on, the Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
And people were like, oh my goodness, how can we control all of these idiots? So we need to put in the Constitution so that we can have federal power as well.
Yeah, it was a counter-revolution.
Right.
There was a revolution, then there was a counter-revolution not too long after that. And I think that's a brilliant point. And it just goes back to that even if the 20s hadn't happened, government would still have grown, maybe it would have grown in different ways. These are the paths that it took. But no matter what, if we could go back in a time machine and start over at 1920, it would grow and not give women the vote. It would still grow. It would just grow from different paths.
Yeah, there were only two presidents that didn't grow the size of government, William Henry Harrison and Calvin Coolidge. And William Henry Harrison kind of had some constraints on his presidency. So
Okay.
He died in 42 days.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to rule when you're dead.
Yeah, he had a big kegger, and got pneumonia and died. So,
Yeah. So I think that that's really the bottom line, is that the state is the problem. The state is the enemy, folks. People are not our enemy. The only reason that other people become our enemies is because they are so indoctrinated that they can't look outside of the box. But I still refuse to see my neighbors as my enemy. I want to reach out to them. And until they prove that they're willing to use violence against me, I won't consider them my enemy. But many people don't think about the fact that they vote for this or that as violence against other people, when it absolutely is. But that's our job. That's our job to bring that to them.
People.
Right. And just like, I mean, I used to be an authoritarian neocon. Like, I know, because I was that person.
Somehow now you're an authoritarian anarchist.
I know. Isn't that weird?
It is.
No, I just like to tell people what to do. They don't have to listen. I'm not going to force them.
I'm not going.
Yeah. So anyways, I think that wraps it up for today, unless you have any closing remarks.
As a parting word to the future presidents that are paying attention, if your intention is to be president, be a president like William Henry Harrison.
Die in office.
Quickly.
Quickly, yes. Yeah. So we're not saying that we would enact violence against them.
No, he died of his own volition.
Yeah.
He partied himself to death.
Yeah, give up the ghost. So I think it's a joke, but it's a great point that we have other solutions. There are other solutions out there. Bottom-up governance is the way to go, and that's groups of people determining what's best for their community and how to run it, and not enacting violence against peaceful people to get your will done for social issues. Those are completely outside the purview of what any governance should be about. So
and remember that, when you're thinking about who your enemy is, it's not your neighbor who you have a disagreement with. It's the people that are using that disagreement to rule you.
Yes, they're manipulating people to feel like they can call authorities on you for doing things they don't like.
Your neighbor that you have, huge political disagreements with, you and that person have way more in common than you do with anybody that's in the ruling class. And so don't let your differences distract you.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep reaching out. And I think I've said before that the goal is not to win this conversation. The goal is to have the next conversation. So we're not, if you look at it from winning and losing, then everybody really loses. Right. Because we want to convince people, and the way to convince them is not to tell them how horrible they are. And I mean, maybe sometimes you have to confront people with, you are talking about enacting violence against me for your own ends. And so that may be a way to talk to people and convince them at times, but generally we want to speak the truth, but do it in a kind way. From my old religious days, I remember speaking the truth in love, and that's really what we want to do. We want to speak the truth in a way that will encourage them to come to their own conclusions about what we're saying, and to encourage them to come to our way of thinking. So,
absolutely.
Thank you very much for being with us today, and I hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and I look forward to bringing you more content. So if you could please like and share and listen and support this show, that would be amazing.
Yep. If you want more shows with me on them, donate to the Patreon. If you don't, also donate to the Patreon and mark it that way so that we can keep track.
All right, guys. Peace.